I never planned to post this. But after everything that happened, and after all the DMs I've gotten asking why I suddenly moved across the country, I think it's time to tell the whole story. Buckle up, this is going to be long. For context, I used to live in a quiet mid-sized town on the East Coast, the kind of place where neighbors wave from across their driveways, but rarely know anything meaningful about each other. I moved there 3 years ago, after getting hired at a private investigations firm. Nothing glamorous, not like TV, but specialized work. My job focused on digital forensics and claims verification for insurance agencies. Basically, if someone lied about being injured, or claimed their spouse was cheating, or tried to scam disability payouts, my team would dig into their online presence, habits, and background. I kept my work private, not because it was secret, but because people tend to get weird around anyone who deals professionally with finding the truth. So I told the neighbors I was a consultant, which was vague enough to stop any follow-up questions. My house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, right next to Mr. Charming himself, Evan. He was 40-something, bald but always bragging about being genetically superior. The kind of man who called every woman sweetheart unironically. The first week I moved in, he marched over with a forced grin and said, "If you need a real man around here, I'm your guy." I laughed awkwardly and cut the conversation short. From that day on, he decided he hated me. He complained about everything. My car being too close to the property line, my recycling bin being too noisy, even the fact that I sometimes walked my dog past his house. The man acted like I was trespassing on his royal grounds. At first, I ignored him. I work long hours, and after spending my days unraveling other people's lies, I don't have the energy to fight over sidewalk space. But Evan escalated hard. The first real incident happened on a Wednesday morning. I walked outside to go to work and found my driver's side mirror dangling by a wire. Not broken off clean, no. Someone had clearly grabbed it with both hands and yanked until it snapped. I instantly knew it was him, but you can't accuse a neighbor with zero proof. So I called my insurance, took pictures, and installed two discrete security cameras. One facing my driveway, one angled across the front of the house. They were small, barely visible. I hoped they'd act as a deterrent. They didn't. 2 weeks later, I woke up to a notification on my phone. Motion detected at 2:17 a.m. When I checked the footage, I saw a dark figure crouching near my garden bed, doing something I couldn't quite make out. I boosted the brightness and saw Evan, muttering to himself as he dumped a bag of something into the soil. The next morning, every plant along that side of the yard was drooping and yellow. Had salted the earth like some medieval warlord. That was the first time I felt the flicker of anger. But I still didn't act, because reporting a neighbor is messy, and he'd probably just get a warning. I wanted him caught, not lightly scolded. Then came the day he made it personal. I'd just gotten home from work when I found a note taped to my front door. At first glance, it looked like a flyer. But when I pulled it off, I realized it was handwritten. "Move out. You don't belong here. Next time I won't be nice." It wasn't the words that set me off. It was the fact he'd taped it directly over my peephole, meaning he'd been inches from my front door, staring into my house, fully aware I lived alone. That night, while transferring evidence from a different case, I made a decision I knew I wouldn't regret. See, Evan had made one critical mistake. He assumed I was just some quiet, harmless girl who worked from home. He had no idea what my real job involved, or how easily I could dig into someone's life and peel it open like an onion. I wasn't going to vandalize his property or threaten him. That's amateur. No, I was going to let him destroy himself with nothing more than the truth. The next morning, I brewed coffee, sat down at my desk, and typed his full name, which I knew from his mailbox, into my databases. Within minutes, the results popped up. What I found made my jaw drop. Evan wasn't just a nuisance. He had two sealed charges from another state, a bankruptcy filing from 5 years ago, and, most interestingly, a pending workers' comp claim for a severe back injury, a claim that would pay out nearly $85,000 if approved, a claim that required proof that he was physically incapable of lifting anything heavier than 10 pounds, a claim that would be instantly denied if someone submitted evidence of him, say, dumping a 50-pound bag of salt in my yard at 2 a.m. That was the moment I smiled, a slow, cold smile I usually reserve for cases involving serial liars. This wasn't going to end with yelling over a fence. This was going to end with paperwork, audits, and consequences sharp enough to cut him to the bone. And the best part, he wasn't going to see it coming. I spent the rest of that morning gathering everything I already had: timestamps, footage, screenshots. Even though I worked in digital forensics, I still treated my own case like any other. No assumptions, no shortcuts. If I were going to bring this man down, every detail had to be airtight. But first, I needed more. One bag of salt and one broken mirror wasn't enough to tank an $85,000 fraud claim. Insurance companies wanted patterns, repeated violations, clear physical capability, documented behavior that contradicted the injury. And if Evan really was the loud, arrogant idiot I suspected he was, he would keep providing me evidence for free. So I waited. It didn't take long. 3 days later, I looked out my window around noon and saw Evan dragging an enormous gas grill across his driveway. Not rolling it, dragging it. The metal legs screeched on the concrete, leaving silver scratches behind. He was grunting, yes, but severely injured people don't hold grills like they're rearranging furniture. I silently thanked the universe that my camera caught everything. He spent the whole afternoon outside, lifting propane tanks, bending, twisting, moving bags of charcoal round. He didn't even realize I was home. That night I downloaded all the footage, tagged everything, and backed it up 3 times. Then I began phase 2. Every insurance company has an anonymous reporting portal. They're not always easy to find, but once you know where to look, it takes about 5 minutes to upload a full case file. The key is to be thorough and calm. No emotional language, no my neighbor is a jerk. Just facts. I laid everything out. Timestamps, video clips, screenshots, geotags, a written summary of observed activities, and a line stating I wish to remain anonymous for safety concerns. When I hit submit, I felt the first wave of satisfaction. Not joy, not yet, but anticipation. Because the thing about fraud investigations is that they don't move fast until they do. 2 weeks passed with no incidents. Evan mostly ignored me, though he still glared whenever our paths crossed. He had no idea his file was already flagged. No idea that 2 investigators were about to perform a scheduled visit to reassess his injury claims. No idea that the trap was already set, and he was walking right into it. Then, on a sunny Tuesday morning, it happened. I was working in my home office when I saw a white sedan pull up in front of Evan's house. 2 people stepped out, one in business attire, one with a clipboard. They approached his door and knocked. I muted my phone, opened my blinds just enough to see, and waited. Evan answered wearing sweatpants and a dramatic-looking back brace. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. He must have purchased it specifically for the inspection. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see the gestures. They asked him to walk. He did, stiffly, like a bad actor in a high school play. They asked him to reach for something on a shelf inside. He exaggerated the struggle, so much that the female investigator actually stepped back a little, probably to avoid getting hit by his performance. Then came the kicker. One of the investigators pointed toward the side gate, the one leading to his backyard. He froze. I knew exactly why. That was where he stored the grill, the propane tanks, and the heavy yard equipment. If they asked him to lift anything, he started shaking his head. He claimed something. I couldn't hear what, but whatever excuse he gave, they didn't buy it. The male investigator walked around him and opened the gate himself, waving for Evan to follow. I saw the exact moment Evan realized he was trapped. He looked around the street, probably checking for witnesses. He didn't look at my house, thankfully, because I depositioned myself behind my curtain like a ghost. After several painfully awkward seconds, he reluctantly followed them into the yard. They pointed at the grill. He hesitated. Then they pointed at the propane tank. He hesitated longer. Finally they pointed at the bag of charcoal leaning against the fence. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were asking him. "Can you lift this?" He panic lifted it. Not gracefully, not confidently, but definitely not like someone with a disabling injury. The investigator noted something on the clipboard. 5 minutes later, they left. Evan shut the gate and collapsed against it, his face ghost white. He stayed there for a long time. When he finally stood up, he didn't limp. He didn't clutch his back. He didn't even pretend anymore. That's when he made his biggest mistake of all. He decided to find someone to blame. And in his mind, there was only one possible culprit: me. That evening, just after sunset, I heard heavy, angry footsteps on my front porch. A fist slammed against my door. Then, "Open up." I didn't move. My security system recorded everything. The shouts, the pounding, the threats whispered under his breath. I stayed silent behind the door, phone in hand, ready to call the police if he tried anything. After a few minutes, he stomped back to the street, muttering curses. The next morning, he wasn't just angry, he was raging. Around 8 a.m., as I was getting ready for work, I heard a loud crash outside. I ran to my window and saw him shoving a trash bag through my mailbox slot, tearing the metal, bending it inward. Then he spit on my porch and stormed off. I opened the door and retrieved the bag. Inside were shredded paper documents, beer cans, food scraps, and, unbelievably, a torn copy of the pamphlet the investigators had given him that morning. His denial letter. Had received it almost immediately, which meant he had officially been caught committing fraud, and now he was retaliating. What he didn't realize was that once he escalated into property damage and harassment, the game changed, and my revenge would shift into its final, devastating phase. The moment I saw the torn denial letter inside that trash bag, something inside me clicked into place, something cold and methodical. Up until then, everything I'd done was passive. Collect evidence, follow procedure, let the system handle the rest. But now Evan had crossed into criminal territory, and that meant I no longer had to play nice. I didn't call the police right away. Instead, I documented everything. Photos of the damaged mailbox, the trash bag contents, the spit on my porch, the security footage. Then I sat down at my desk, opened a new case file, and created a detailed timeline of every incident, from the broken mirror to the salted garden, to last night's pounding on my door. I slept lightly that night, half expecting him to show up again. But there was only silence. The kind of silence that tells you someone's not done, just recalibrating. The next day was Thursday. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard a soft metallic click outside. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct enough to raise every hair on my neck. I checked my cameras, and my blood ran cold. Evan was kneeling by my front tire with a screwdriver in hand, loosening the valve stem of my tire. Not slashing it, not puncturing it, but slowly releasing air. A subtle sabotage that could cause a blowout on the highway. He was muttering to himself, looking around every few seconds, clearly believing he was clever. He finished, pocketed the screwdriver, and walked back to his house like nothing had happened. That was it. That was the moment the story flipped from annoying neighbor dispute to potential felony. I called the police, not the non-emergency line, the direct station number. I calmly explained the situation, told them I had video evidence of property sabotage, harassment, and threats. When they asked if I felt unsafe, I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "and I have proof." 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. They watched the footage silently, pausing occasionally to glance at each other. When the video finished, one of them nodded and said, "We'll take it from here." They walked straight to Evan's house. I watched from my living room window as he answered the door, immediately defensive. He pointed in my direction, gesturing wildly, his face turning purple with rage. One officer held up a hand, stern and unmoved. The other pointed toward their patrol car. Evan tried to argue. Then he tried to refuse. That was a mistake. He was handcuffed on the porch. The sight was more satisfying than I'd like to admit. The officers brought him to the station for questioning, and after reviewing the evidence again with their supervisor, they filed charges: harassment, property damage, attempted sabotage, and violating municipal ordinances. None were serious enough to land him in jail long term, but they were serious enough to trigger deeper consequences, especially because he was already being investigated for fraud. And here's where everything spiraled for him. His insurance company, now aware of his aggressive behavior and the criminal charges, reopened the fraud case and escalated it to the state level. Workers' comp fraud isn't a small thing. It carries hefty fines and sometimes prison time. What they found, and this part I learned later from public records, was a pattern of deception in multiple claims had filed over the years. Once they started digging, the whole structure of lies had built began collapsing. Meanwhile, Evan was released on bail the following day. But he didn't come home. His house stayed dark for nearly a week. Mail piled up. His trash bins remained untouched. It was as if he vanished overnight. I thought maybe he'd gone to stay with family or run off to another state. A part of me hoped he was gone for good. Then, 10 days later, at 2:03 a.m., he came back. My phone buzzed with emotion alert. When I checked the feed, there he was, stumbling, disheveled, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He paced on the sidewalk between our houses, talking to himself, rubbing his hands through his hair compulsively. For a tense minute, he walked toward my porch. I held my breath. Then he stopped, turned around, and sat down on his own front steps instead. He stayed there 4 hours, head in his hands, rocking back and forth. For the first time in months, I felt something unexpected. Pity, not sympathy. He didn't deserve that, but pity for a man who had destroyed his own life and finally realized it. Around sunrise, a police cruiser rolled up. 2 officers stepped out and approached him. He didn't resist this time. He just stood up, nodded, and let them guide him into the car. That was the last time I ever saw him. Later that day, a neighbor mentioned that Evan had violated a restraining order, one the police had issued on my behalf after reviewing the evidence, by approaching my property line in the middle of the night. Combined with the ongoing fraud investigation, it gave the court enough reason to hold him until trial. And then more news trickled out over the next months. His workers' comp fraud case proceeded. He lost his job. His remaining assets were seized to cover the fines. His house went into foreclosure. His truck was repossessed. He declared bankruptcy for the second time in his life. And eventually, he moved states, or so I heard. No one knew where. But the best, strangest part, I never actually did anything illegal to him. I never touched his property, never confronted him, never retaliated physically. I just let him destroy himself while documenting every step. When I finally sold my house and moved across the country, partly for a fresh start, partly because the whole ordeal had drained me more than I cared to admit, I left knowing one simple truth. Sometimes revenge isn't about striking back. Sometimes it's about stepping aside and letting a person trip over the mess they made. Evan had built the fire. All I did was remove the safety barriers and let the flames reach him.